Welcome to the 2021 Sunstone Symposium session, D. Michael Quinn Memorial. At Sunstone, we are making it a goal to build a community that allows many ways for people to express their faith. Our tagline is, there is more than one way to Mormon. We invite you to help us build a community where all paths are given space to be better understood. Please support us in our mission by making a donation and subscribing at sunstone.org. After the symposium, Sunstone staff will edit, polish, and re-upload all of this year's session videos to the Whova app. It'll take about 2 weeks for everything to be available, but once it is, every video will be available to watch and rewatch in the Whova app through the end of 2021. Today is our first day of live recording, and so for those on the live recording, if you can't hear, we apologize for the inconvenience, and we will be uploading these so you will be able to hear it. Please type any questions you have into the Whova app to be addressed during the Q&A, or if you're watching in person, we'll open the audience mic for questions at the end as time allows. So about this presentation, to honor the memory of eminent historian and Sunstone friend, D. Michael Quinn, this session will screen video tributes from his friends and colleagues. Afterwards, memories can be shared by in-person attendees. And real quick, just to introduce you to Clifton Jolley is known in Utah as a newspaper columnist and host of PBS Civic Dialogue. He has been published in the New York Times, Dialogue, Sunstone, Western Folklore, and others. His 2 PBS documentaries were nominated for Emmys. He is president of Advent Communications and publishes op-eds in the Huffington Post, Salt Lake Tribune, and others under the tutelage of Bob Reese. So I'll hand the floor over to him. Thank
you. I promise that this will be even drier than most of Mike's presentations were. And so if you should get gelato while you still have a chance. This cup is for Michael. It's empty. But the last time we were together, we went to Nelson's. And he loved it. And so he's had plenty. I want to begin with a modest apology. And it's for a bit of deception. But it's a circumstantial rather than an intentional deception. When I suggested this session to Sunstone, I was in the process of reviewing Mike's autobiography, which actually is more a series of journal entries than a cohesive narrative of his life. I had originally received the text from Mike several years ago, asking for recommended edits, which he must have known was hopeful rather than a wise request. Since I am something of a short form writer and the manuscript was nearly 700 pages long. He could go on and on about everything, but especially his life. I worried over the task for a number of weeks, then responded to Mike that I might not be the right person to accomplish the necessary task. However, I told him that I was very interested in what he had to say about me, so I would appreciate if he would go through those 700 pages, find the ones about me, and send them. That may seem to you self-involved and insensitive, which in fact it was, but I knew that the guy I'd known for more than half a century would be more amused than offended, and I knew he'd send me the pages, which he did. However, what one is unwilling to do for one who is alive, one finds oneself longing to do for one who is dead. So I requested of his children, Moshe, Mary, and Lisa, and their mother, Jan, that I be given another chance, to which they consented, as they did to me reading from the journal for this session. The short time, however, that intervened between my foolhardy request, I suspect I'm even less likely to have accomplished the edit with Mike gone than I would have been with him alive to punish me for not doing it. has resulted in signature books seeking to publish the journal as it is, with whatever modest editing may be required. I suggest that they check his punctuation because Mike was more creative than disciplined when it came to punctuation. So while I want everyone to yearn for and buy that book when it is published, which they think will be a year from now, I don't want to tread on the toes of signature, although they have been generous to permit me a few excerpts. What I will be reading will include notes from the journals, but now are more largely excerpts from emails that Mike sent me over the past 15 years and memories from our childhood of 60 years ago. When I mentioned this new direction to my wife, by the way, she said, "Don't you dare do a bait and switch at Sunstone, as you have been consistently doing to me for the past 30 years. Alas, some of us are more predictable than penitent, so bait and switch it is, although I believe the outcome will be pretty much the same. A less than adequate memorialization of the soul and genius of the man himself." The new churches of America are essentially political, which is only to say they admit to what churches of the past have not. More than philosophical, they are happily tribal. More than devotional, they are energetically confrontational. More than sacramental, they are insistently regimental. More than truthful, they tend to be post-factual. One might argue that the new churches, in fact, are not churches at all, but the Republican and Democratic parties, an argument with which Mike would have argued, as he did with many thoughts not his own. However, he did regard formal religion as inclusive of politics, although he believed it should not be. And he did not view tribalism as inherently evil, but rather a social construct not unlike families. There are good ones and there are bad ones. When Harry Dunn, a Capitol Police officer, described to Congress the insurrection and invasion of the US Capitol building on January 6th of this year, he said, "It was a war that we fought, and a war is composed of a bunch of different battles, and everybody fought a different battle that day, but it was all for the same war, and that's the way things are." If you accept his premise, and I do, then history is best understood in terms of individual experience, and each of us experiences and sees through a lens that is uniquely our own. Part of the reason for this individuation of conflict and memory, not only in recent events, but throughout time, is that history is not the way it often is described, as a vast pageant of events more important than the players that inhabit it. If our God is a God of history, then history is not merely what happened or even what happened to us. God's history is us, individuals, souls, each understanding, experiencing, and seeing through our own lens. There are many lenses through which to view and review the history of our church, and Michael Quinn looked through most of them: historical, philosophical, social, political, personal, sexual, economic, and many more. And he was the first to admit that although he attempted objectivity, he was at best an informed, although not entirely objective observer. How could he be when the very church in which he believed, to which he had committed body, brain, and spirit, was, due to historical prejudices, political affectations, science denialism, and historical persecutions, waging its own battle, seeing through its own lens? And I would hasten to add, Mike was more forgiving of the church for its myopia than the church was of his own. From his birth And for decades before Mike recognized the fact of his God-given predicament, he found himself at odds with an adversary he had loved and served his whole life. An adversary that was apparently better armed and more willing to savage those it presumed to be enemies of the faith than Michael was prepared to be savage in what he believed he had been given by God to become. Not only the faith's defender, but its corrector. And while the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints began its inquisition of saints such as the September 6, which included Michael, Michael proceeded to be what he had become, to do what he had been given to do, seek to defend the future of the church by discovering and interpreting the history we share, but which, before Michael and the many others who sought to discover, reveal, and understand our history, we had been largely ignorant of. And ignorant by design of that very institution which claims, and I believe, to be one of God's oracles on earth, but which always has been an oracle correlated to a myth, which was not always true to our origins. Even as we continue to fight our independent battles in a war that began, we are told, before we were born and in heaven, it's important we recognize that many are our own and often private battles, as were a number of Michael's before he understood the conflicting messages of the church and accepted the clearer voice of the divine. For 60 years, I was and continue to be Michael's friend, although not his best or even a better friend. We grew up together in Glendale, California, roomed together at BYU, served together in a bishopric in the Salt Lake Avenues, where he had recommended we buy a home a block down the street from his own, which we did. Together, we tore out the red shag carpet in his living room to reveal the early 20th century quarter-sawn oak beneath, and then we retiled his fireplace. Those tasks of amateur renovation, as I recall, we did without his wife Jan's permission. There's Jan. I'm sorry. Today I would ask before, but I was young and foolish. And we did it to the considerable horror of Jan's mother, whose only comment was, "That floor will be cold come winter." You remember? May not have been there. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, she was right. But if inconvenient, the floor, like Michael's research, was also beautiful, a revelation of what had long been hidden. I use the word hidden intentionally and after long consideration. We all have secrets, truths kept hidden, many of them unnecessarily so, some even from ourselves. In Philip Roth's Sabbath Theater, the protagonist, Mickey Sabbath, is told by his wife, "You're as sick as your secrets," which was not Roth's opinion of Sabbath specifically or secrets in general, as he continues. It was not for the first time that he was hearing this pointless, shallow, idiotic maxim. "Wrong," he told her. "You're as adventurous as your secrets, as abhorrent as your secrets, as lonely as your secrets, as alluring as your secrets, as courageous as your secrets, as vacuous as your secrets, as lost as your secrets." Michael was an exemplar of a number of those results of secrets. He was often lonely, he was courageous, he was at times lost, and more. But although he was compelled by circumstance and God's calling to surrender many of his secrets, he discovered that the truth, if difficult, also is liberating. The paradox and tragedy he recognized is that the greater difficulty of the secrets he had been compelled by social and religious prejudice to keep were as damaging in their revelation for Jan and their children as their surrender was liberating for him. As he wrote to me more than a decade ago, leaving entirely aside my son Adam's disappearance and suicide 20 years ago, I have spent sleepless nights worrying about my 3 other children, despite having no reason to do so. The keeper of many secrets himself, he worried about his failure as a father more to help his children with secrets of their own. At a Sunstone Symposium nearly 20 years ago, Michael attended a session I was giving, which was a surprise because he was not nearly so interested in what I said as the world was in what he said. But he knew I would be reading a poem I had written about Adam as a memorial for the family. It's called Last Fruit. Quietly through City Creek snow to tell your beads in the canyon and the trees where his soul may yet be tangled in the branches, cold in late snow, early spring. Listen for him clattering in the ice storm as he remembers poems, slightly singing low. Watch for his mad memory and your memorization that will not keep his face or hold. Early harvest, last fruit. Go into the canyon and the trees to harrow in the hoarfrost what did not take root, is consequence of everything we did and did not do. Do not be sad or fearful. Every dark imagination must come true. And in the branches is a snare where we may yet find him, dancing on the air, singing through the frost, tracing his long, sweet hair. Go into the canyon. He is caught in nets of branches and of air. Quiet so you don't frighten him who was so frightened and so spare of obligation to us have suffered as any might have been. He is waiting. He is safe. He has found the spring that does not fail in snow. His peace is the peace we all will know. You will find him in the trees. Last fruit, first free. From the time he was a child, Michael Quinn harbored and was harried by multiplicities of nature, devotion, intellect, and circumstances not entirely within his control. Called of God to bear witness to the truth and set apart by a prophet's blessing to become an apostle, he was persecuted by a few malevolent power brokers and excommunicated for doubtful apostasy. A loving father and husband, he suffered for more than half his life the secret of his homosexuality, from which he initially believed God would heal him if he were righteous, which he was, but ultimately understood to be his true nature. Conflicted by a conservative personality, he was the darling of liberal dissenters. His research, articles, and books have provided detail for critics of Mormonism to prop up their attacks. All the while, he believed himself to be a defender of the faith. A gentleman who loved God and respected persons, nevertheless, he once told me there was no one whose ox he would not happily gore in pursuit of the truth. I'm sorry, but the image of Mike goring an ox is hysterical. He was, in fact, a true believer loved by intellectuals who thought he shared their doubts, but hoped his hopes were substantive. Well known and widely respected, invited and honored, his singular calling of God and the necessarily private life of a radical gay Mormon academic made him solitary. which is only one of the reasons that while surrounded by admirers and in the thrall of a community who loved and respected him, he died alone. The arc of his life fulfilling a tragic archetype similar to that of the prophet Joseph Smith. And I say that advisedly. While Mike was not murdered by his persecutors, he might have been, and he nevertheless was a martyr to the cause of his true religion, a devotional purpose that consumed him no less than historical research and analysis consumed his time. Diffident by nature, absent by necessity, he perhaps was not understood so much as he was misunderstood. His radical Mormonism caused him to believe in the Book of Mormon, which he considered to be foundational and the consequence of an urtext that we still do not fully understand. He believed in prophets while at the same time recognizing the scriptures teach that oracles can be mistakenly wicked, untrue, and even while they are still the chosen of God. From the time he was a child, Michael harbored and was harried by multiplicities of nature. And as a result, his life was defined not only by discovery and insight, but by tragedy. From the many communications that I had with Michael over the years, and if you could read the corpus, and once you have a chance to read his journals, you'll discover a naivete because he believed that everything was going to work out if he was just good. In point of fact, the first time I realized that he actually thought that God would make him heterosexual was at a fireside that he was giving. And when I asked him, how could you possibly think you were going to become an apostle? He said, well, a prophet of God set me apart to be an apostle. I said, yeah, but the other thing he didn't know about. And he said, well, I thought God would change me. And that, I suggest to you, is true faith, however naive. Michael's secrets began before he was born and continued to discipline who he trusted and why well into middle age, when he realized finally his truth. Informed by the historical truths he discovered and published, nevertheless, his truth were the most he could hope of the universality he had always hoped for God's plan of salvation. And that, unlike we had been taught, those universal truths are not simple, but complex, like Michael, like ourselves. In the fall of 1966, Dialogue, a journal of Mormon thought, was in its sophomore year of publication. Without seeing an issue, Joseph Fielding Smith had told Newsweek magazine he didn't see how its publication could be anything but bad for the church, and he may have been right. But the seminaries and institutes had not yet taken the position that its faculty could not publish there or be on the board of editors, as I did and was while an institute teacher. So a copy of that issue had found its way onto the bookshelf of the LDS Institute of Religion in San Luis Obispo, California, where I discovered that article by who I should have looked it up before I came. Who was the pastor who did the article that said there never was a revival such as Joseph Smith suggested? Good, none of us know. Pardon? Show off. Not since reading William Mulder's Among the Mormons had I been at once so religiously and intellectually aroused. I'd found Mulder among my father's books after Dad died, and I read it simply because I wanted to read what he had read. I was 14, and it was the serious beginning of my religious education. The only books of any length, and I'm going to skip that because I've got way too many pages. I was confident upon reading the article that at some point, someone would come up with an argument to satisfy the fact that, in fact, there was a burnt over district. There was a revival where Joseph Smith had lived. The good pastor had demonstrated persuasively that there was one there and there was one there, but not here. Years later, my friend Michael, after his excommunication, would publish in dialogue compelling proof that there was indeed a religious revival in the region where Joseph Smith grew up. And as with all his arguments and research, his arguments diminished, if not dismissed, the good reverend's more limited and lacking study. In 2014, Mike responded to a snarky question I asked about whether he might do better if he did less, especially in terms of revealing what others wished not to be revealed. He said, "Yes, Clifton, you are right. In telling the truth as I understand it, I don't care whose ox I gore." You love that. But goring the ox was not the point. The point was there is an ox, although perhaps not the ox in which we are instructed to believe. When the title of this paper was published by Sunstone, the following question was posted. Did Michael ever express disappointment that his membership was never reinstated, or did he try to have it done? Following his excommunication, Mike went through a period of depression, even considering suicide. As we spoke about our similar emotional dysfunctions over time, I told him that I believed a life that does not permit one to give back to God what God has carelessly given can be a desperate life indeed. He did not entirely agree with me, although he did not condemn suicides, perhaps in part due to Adam, even though he had not himself succumbed to his depression. His sense was that the progressive revelation God intends life to be depends on a kind of dangerous freedom of will and discovery that does not dictate either sadness nor happiness, but understanding, or at the very least, a suspension of expectations. What God made us, we are, and what we are, conflicted by the world, results in an ambiguity of experience, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, and some of us happily more one than the other. Because Mike was a true believer, his excommunication, which preceded the announcement of his being gay, was devastating. But over time, he accommodated it with the recognition of its inevitability. I read to you from one of his emails. In the months-long process of my excommunication in 1993, I was initially charged with apostasy for writing the historical article that analyzed the 1843 to 1890s Mormon view that endowed women had received the Melchizedek priesthood without ordination to specific offices within the priesthood. I didn't advocate ordaining women to offices, but commented that the LDS leadership would increase their self-esteem by acknowledging publicly that temple-endowed women have priesthood. Thus, can a historian become a theological heretic? As one who believes in Joseph Smith's revelations, he writes, I accept as legitimate the allowance for excommunication in the Doctrine and Covenants, called blotting out of names in the Book of Mormon. Likewise, the Hebrew Bible provided for tribal banishment and post-exile casting out from the synagogue as the ancient Jewish version of Mormon excommunication. Having said all of the above, I agree with Barack Obama. Just because you have a hammer doesn't mean every problem is a nail. I agree that most Mormon leaders would rather use the hammers at their disposal than struggle with the compassionate long suffering that is the burden of religious leadership. I didn't correct him at the time because I had not yet converted to Judaism, but the fact is Reform Jews don't excommunicate. They admit there are good Jews and there are bad Jews. There are observant Jews and non-observant Jews. All, unfortunately, are Jews. I'm not sure how happy Mike was to discover, or given his distancing from day-to-day administration of the church, whether he did. I only found out about it yesterday when Bob Reese informed me that the church no longer excommunicates. How many were not aware? Before you get too eager, I continue. As part of, this is what the church handbook says. And I'm not going to read any of it. Basically what it says, it doesn't mention excommunication. It says that your membership is withdrawn. I love that euphemism because somebody here in Salt Lake thinks that fixes it in some way. I suspect that given the option, Mike prefers his excommunication to the mincing trivialization of having his membership withdrawn, as though his lifelong sacrifice and commitment to the cause of truth and understanding in Mormonism could merely be withdrawn, as though it were a country club permission or a pass to the pool at the YMCA. I also suspect he would have welcomed the opportunity to educate the brethren of the far greater damage done the integrity of the church by seeking to forestall research, comment, and open, unassailed dissemination of the truth. I quote from Michael again, although I've been an armchair radical most of my life, I've advocated step-by-step gradualism for the most part. I don't advocate the ordination of Mormon women, which would require new revelation, but I don't argue with or criticize Mormons who do advocate it. On the other hand, I've publicly advocated, since I was a BYU professor, that the LDS headquarters should acknowledge that LDS women have priesthood after receiving the endowment, an acknowledgement that requires no new revelation. What people regarded as unwise or controversial of me and Margaret Toscano in the 1980s became excommunicatable from 1993 to the present. A sad devolution. As, by the way, I believe was Margaret Toscano's excommunication, although even I would have excommunicated Paul Toscano, a close personal friend, by the way, but very disagreeable. Mike's face to the world was resigned, even cheerful, apparently at peace with his predicament and choices. Sometimes he was happy, especially when presenting or among friends. My wife, Abigail, once said to Michael when he was staying at our home, you know, you are something of a celebrity. Mike smiled that smile that seemed more guileless than it in fact was, and answered simply, yes. But although he had his pleasures, his life was directed by a sense of the fallibility and disappointments of not only our church, but the world. In an email, he remembered a friend of ours, Bishop Callister's daughter, who died terribly and tragically when we were teenagers. From Paula Callister's 1960 death onward, my griefs have been like your poem about the Lakota mother, an empty, gnawing feeling of loss. But my griefs have also been filled with regret and guilt for words said and unsaid by me, for kindnesses received and too little unreciprocated, and when deceased beloved ones have been my age or younger, for surviving them, which is a pretty good description of how I feel about Mike now. At the time, I thought I understood what he was talking about, but his death has taught me better. The following is the poem to which he referred, and you will be surprised to discover that although I did serve on my mission among the Lakota Sioux, the poem is about the Blackfeet. I loved it when he was wrong. The title of the photo on the wall at Calgary Lodge is Blackfoot Woman Who Walked with Joseph on the Long Walk, Carried the Shield, whose name was Never Sit Down, for a husband gone by the pox before the crossing of the river called Missouri. And each day she took down and put up the lodge he called Dog Chase's son, and painted with prints of her hands. Old when the photo was taken, every fire she had builded or rabbit caught a track in her face. She lived to see King George visit the First Nations. With her own water, softened a buffalo robe for the great man, singing, "Roll in this, white father, warm yourself in my piss." When she was too old to carry wood or make argument, on a clear night in mid-March, she was put outside to sing, the words freezing on her lips. Moon, do not go without me. Stars, take my eyes. My moccasins are black, my mouth red with berries, but I am not Blackfoot or blood. I am the last of the pagan peoples, and I do not regret to die. I didn't correct Mike about his tribal mistake, but I privately, as I've said, enjoyed the mistake, since mine are so many and his were so few. And I was especially pleased to tell him before he told me anything, as I did the reversal by the church of its policy to prohibit the children of gay parents from being baptized. He writes, "Thanks for the thoughtfulness of leaving a phone message about the first presidency's reversal of President Monson's anti-family, anti-Christian policy regarding gay marriages and the children thereof. You're right on 3 scores. First, that this blessed change does not cause me to even consider rejoining a church whose policy offends my Christian beliefs. Second, that I would not even consider rejoining the LDS Church until it begins allowing plural wives in countries that sanction polygamy and their husbands to be baptized, endowed, and sealed in marriage while maintaining their pre-baptism families. Third, there are other policies that are obstacles to my considering realignment with the LDS Church, such as the first presidency's financing and directing, both publicly and secretly, political campaigns against legal rights for LGBT persons, against pro-female laws, policies such as equal pay for equal work at a minimum, and the Equal Rights Amendment as the ultimate, and also they're against labor unions." I like that. Also against labor unions. Mike was a democratic socialist. And so when he says against labor unions, that's like being, well, against Michael. Commenting on his own publications while pretending to congratulate me on mine, he wrote, "I just read your essay and complaint, and you are snarkily honest. I've tried to be honest during the decades of publishing, usually without the snark, but with much irony, usually stated by juxtapositions. He who has eyes," Mike says, "let him see." He was also a little pretentious from time to time. For years, Michael wore a Mogen David, celebrating a people who had been persecuted over the centuries even more than his own, whether Hispanic or Mormon. Mike grew up not only secretly gay, but also secretly Mexican, half Mexican. His father was Mexican. And he grew up in Glendale, which is a lily white community where you're not permitted to be a Mexican. And so he was Italian. I fail to see how that improves his circumstance. Nevertheless, no criticism of Italians present. For years, Michael wore the Mogen David. He loved and respected Judaism and was one of the few friends not confused when I converted to Judaism, while at the same time insisting on my Mormonism. Life, after all, is as full of confusion as it is of devotion, as he wrote in 2017. Among the reasons we remained friends since you were 12 and I was 13, I was 13, he was 14, I think, is that each of us always had odd mixtures of childhood hospitalizations, faith, skepticism, sarcasm, devotion, rebelliousness, and appreciation for both literature and science. Your teenage devotion to science was more rigorous than my anti-evolution prejudice during junior high and high school, but I caught up with you in that regard while we were roommates at BYU. Life has been a roller coaster for both of us. Like the Simon and Garfunkel song of the same anti-establishment era, you and I are still crazy after all these years. Indeed. When I was on my mission among the Lakota Sioux, I attended a camp meeting, probably similar to those Joseph Smith attended in his youth, where an ecstatic young man sprang from his seat and ran up and down the aisles between the tent posts shouting, "I'm full of the Spirit. I'm full of the Spirit. And I'm crazy, but it's a wonderful crazy." Being crazy with Mike was a lot like that, if somewhat less ecstatic. But I digress. The Star of David. Mike and I enjoyed fellowship that included our doubts and beliefs and included Judaism. He wrote, near the start of a wonderful documentary about the violinist that I watched on PBS last night, he knew that I had never watched a violinist on PBS. He told a joke I think you'll enjoy. In a Russian boys' school, the teacher asked the small class what important event happened in Russia during 1799. When no one raised his hand, the teacher asked several boys, and one by one, they admitted they didn't know. He denounced them as idiots for not knowing that Pushkin was born in 1799. Then he asked a Jewish boy, "Do you know what happened in 1812? And the Jewish student answered, "Pushkin's bar mitzvah." In 2016, Mike wrote, "This Thanksgiving Day, I'm grateful for beautiful exceptions. Think of spirals. It seems that naturally occurring spirals are overwhelmingly ugly, as in tornadoes and hurricanes that occur on billions of worlds within a single spiral galaxy. Likewise, human-made spirals are overwhelmingly destructive, as in the spiral tooling in billions of gun barrels versus the mere thousands of spiral staircases. However, I thank the universe and humankind for the statistically rare spirals of beauty. They give me comfort." And he needed, how many? 15? A full 15? Great. And he needed and deserved comfort, not the least because of a secret he kept for more than half his life, which we discussed in a series of emails I've redacted and combined. Let me share an inter-family conversation that a friend of mine in Southern California shared with me recently. Openly gay and unattached, he has long hoped to raise a child with a same-sex companion. His brother was publicly sustained to a stake presiding position in Utah a month before the LDS Church's acknowledgement of its policy of spiritually disenfranchising the children of gays and of legally married same-sex couples. The older brother told him by phone that week, "For the first time in my life, I'm ashamed to be a Mormon." My gay friend replied, "I appreciate your compassion, but I am proud that you are serving in the church." Michael said, "I am thinking of Zion and weeping by the waters of Babylon." He then goes on to talk about, shortly after his excommunication, being invited to speak to a group of disaffected Mormons who were surprised to find how supporting of the church he was. And he was disappointed because, as he described, their applause was tepid. In the Snows of Kilimanjaro, Ernest Hemingway wrote of his protagonist, "Now he would never write the things that he had saved to write until he knew enough to write them well. Well, he would not have to fail at trying to write them either. Maybe you could never write them, and that was why you put them off and delayed the starting. Many will regret that unwritten writing, those uncompleted projects, unpublished books, the vast store of knowledge now lost to us. But the misfortune of Michael's death, I feel most deeply, is not the questions only he is likely to be able to answer, or when I have to worry over beliefs and believing, needing to call him, or even when I'm trying to remember our childhood, of which he had an encyclopedic memory, as he did of everything and all of which I've forgotten. Because I know that this great misfortune is not mine alone, or even primarily my own. Many others, among them his family, have greater claim. And because his success as a historian did not keep him from the failures all fathers make, failures we shared with one another and over which we commiserated. And because his failures were circumscribed by secrets he could not share until later in life, and even then not adequately manage in terms of the scope of a life which at first did not permit them. Nor is it because he was such a good and constant friend to me, especially during those times when I was not to him. Nor am I able to find peace in his dreams, both failed and fulfilled. The dreams he had for his church, for his family, for himself. What most troubles me now is that damn condo in which he died. He inherited it from his mother. In 2015, he wrote to me, "My goal is to sell the condo for enough money to live wherever I want for as long as I want in each city for the duration of my estimated life. I hope to do that and much more next spring, and then put the condo up for sale in the summer of 2016. During the interim, I've been winnowing through small stuff that I can do without. Giving away 16 shelf feet of books has been my main achievement, but aside from emptying bookshelves, the closets, cupboards, and dresser drawers are at least half empty. They never were more than half empty. Mike died still in the condo. His research and mission of writing and revelation kept him from ever completely cleaning, much less selling his dreams." Still crazy. Thank you. Time for a few questions. Any questions or comments? I know you're all here for Michael. It's the biggest audience I've ever had. Thank you very much. Oh, there are questions on the app, okay.
One of the questions that has been asked is, did Michael ever express disappointment that his membership was never reinstated, or did he try to have that done?
That was no, he was not, he was initially disappointed. He got over it and got to the point, as I mentioned in the paper, that he would not come back until the church was prepared to align itself with his specific religious vision. I'm still waiting. Another question?
The question was, what do you believe Michael personally saw as the biggest impact of his work on the field of Mormon studies and on the faith as a whole?
I don't know. Don't care. I'm sorry. His impact will be judged by others, not immediately, I think, because we all know what he's written and the contributions he's made. It remains to be seen whether it will make any difference, except for the few who've read it.
In his writings, did Michael try to reconcile his homosexuality with LDS theology on the necessity of eternal heterosexual marriage for exaltation?
He did reconcile it, yes. He reconciled it to the knowledge that heterosexual marriage as a pre-qualification for redemption and exaltation into the kingdom is apostate. It's a failed concept that was created as Joseph Smith tried to restore all things. It was a failure of Judaism. It was subsequently a failure of Catholicism, failure of Mormonism. He realized that if that were the case, God would not have made him gay. Anything else?
Yeah, I think there's one more question on the app. And if any of you have questions, feel free to come up here or write in the app. Was Brother Quinn working on another book that is going to be published, or is there any partially finished book that someone will take up to finish his work?
Oh, yes. The question is whether we'll find them all. He was always working on a number of projects. That's why he couldn't get out of that damn condo. I think what is most certain to be published will be his journals, which to anyone who has read his work are going to be incredibly interesting. Some of the detail here is from the journals, more from our emails. But yeah, I suspect other things will come out. Jan, have the kids found any more manuscripts as they went through? He sent all of his library, including his papers and research, to which university? To Yale. Oh, well, so pretentious. Why not BYU? Never mind, I'm done. Thank you.